The Roman Republic, in its first 250 years, had not been a great power. Only from the mid 4th century onwards to become a dominant power in Italy, and only in the 3rd century does it truly begin to become a major world power. Now, when we last spoke, the Romans had defeated Pyrrhus, and in that struggle, they had allied closely with the city of Carthage. Carthage, if you'll recall, had been founded by the Phoenicians just a few decades before Rome itself had been founded, according to tradition, in 814 BC. And Carthage, at this point, is the largest city in Africa or Europe, really anywhere in the Mediterranean, once you were west of Egypt at this point. Now, Carthage, like Rome, is a republic. Carthage, like Rome, is not a democracy. It too is an oligarchy. The leading families of the original settlers of Carthage controlled the land, the wealth, and the government of the city. Like Rome, Carthage is expanding. Carthage, unlike Rome, is a sea power. And in the 3rd century BC, Carthage is unquestionably the most powerful maritime state in the Mediterranean. The Carthaginian navy controls the coasts of North Africa, the Western Mediterranean. Carthage controls most of the islands in the Western Mediterranean: Malta, Corsica, Sardinia, much of Sicily, as well as Majorca, Minorca, Ibiza. And they control southern Spain. Carthaginians are not just strong militarily, but they are exceedingly powerful economically. They control trade in the Mediterranean. Virtually all trade going into Western Europe and to Africa passes through Carthage or is carried in Carthaginian ships. They're wealthy, they're powerful, and they have a rather interesting military. Their army is made up of mercenaries. Most of the soldiers in the Carthaginian army are Greeks from Greece and the Eastern Kingdoms, Celts from what's now France, Spain, and northern Italy, or North Africans from the lands of Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. As well as mercenaries, there are groups of allies from the African kingdoms and states controlled by Carthage. All of them will have Carthaginian officers, but Carthaginian soldiers are relatively rare. Instead, Carthaginians serve in the navy. The Carthaginian navy is quite remarkable. Ships looking something like this. They would have been rowed by banks of oars, up to several hundred. And the people pulling the oars would have been citizens of Carthage. These ships were built in such a way that every part was numbered. So when a warship came into the harbor in Carthage, it could be pulled out, quickly repaired, or a new ship could be quickly assembled because there would be stacks and stacks of identical parts that would fit in any ship. Now, these two powers are different, and in the centuries before 264 BC, they had generally been friendly towards each other. They were the two most powerful non-Greek states in the Mediterranean. and neither of them especially liked the Greeks. The Carthaginians were not particularly interested in controlling the Italian peninsula, and the Romans did not have a navy. Rome's army was made up of its citizens. Now, in the decades, the time right after the invasion of Pyrrhus, Carthage and Rome are both absorbing, conquering the Greek cities in southern Italy and Sicily. As they do so, they are slowly growing closer and closer to each other. And it seems almost inevitable that there'll be a conflict. The conflict starts relatively simply. A group of mercenaries called the Mamertines, who are from Italy, will take over the city of Messina in the corner of Sicily closest to the Italian peninsula. They kill the men, marry the women, redistribute the property. They come into conflict with the last remaining independent Greek city in Sicily, Syracuse. And the two cities, Messina and Syracuse, begin to have tensions between them. Now, in order to get an advantage against the much larger and more powerful city of Syracuse, the Mamertines seek an alliance with Rome, and their representatives approach the Roman Senate, arguing that they're Italians. The Roman Senate recognizes this and forms an alliance with them. King Hero of Syracuse, meanwhile, has made an alliance with the Carthaginians. So, as Messina and Syracuse begin to come into conflict, they pull in their allies, the Romans and the Carthaginians, and war begins in Sicily. The Romans send a large army across the narrow straits and begin to dominate the island. King Hero switches sides. Syracuse becomes an ally of the Romans. The Roman army is generally unbeatable on the island of Sicily. But Sicily is an island. The Carthaginians have a navy that is unbeatable. So the Romans can land soldiers in Sicily. They can win every battle in Sicily, but once they're in Sicily, they can be cut off by the Carthaginian navy. The Romans decide that they need to get greater equality with the Carthaginians. They find a wrecked Carthaginian warship. They disassemble it. They copy it. Begin building warships for themselves. While the ships are being built, Roman soldiers who've never been to sea practice on the shore how to pull the oars, how to maneuver the ship once they're at sea. Now, of course, they will not be able to equal Carthage's experience of centuries as a great naval power. So they'll come up with an idea of how to make things more equal. They develop a thing called the corvus, which is a drawbridge with a hook on the end. When a Roman ship will get near a Carthaginian ship, they will send the corvus crashing down into the Carthaginian ship, and heavily armored Roman soldiers will run across the bridge into the Carthaginian ship and begin killing everyone on board, making a sea battle more like a land battle and easier for the Romans to win. Soon, Roman fleets defeat Carthaginian fleets, and the two militaries continue to crash into each other. Now, the war goes on for 24 years. And as Carthage has ultimately a limited financial ability, Carthage finds itself facing bankruptcy, and the Carthaginians sue the Romans for peace. The Romans agree. Carthage gives up its claims on the island of Sicily and agrees to pay the Romans a large sum of gold. Once this is done, both cities agree they will have no problems with the other. However, Carthage has its bankruptcy problem. They can pay the Romans or pay their other bills. The Carthaginians approach King Ptolemy in Egypt, the richest man in the Mediterranean, seeking a loan. But the Egyptians say they don't want to get involved in disputes between Rome and Carthage. Without a loan, the Carthaginians still need to pay their debts. And they make perhaps a stupid decision. Carthaginian government decides to stop paying the mercenaries in its army. The mercenaries, who have been hired by Carthage to fight for them, stop being paid. And since they are no longer being paid, they rebel and attempt to take over the city of Carthage. It is a very, very nasty war. It's called the Truceless War, with the mercenary force and the military of Carthaginian citizens both refusing to take prisoners or have mercy on the other. While this war is going on, the Romans seize the islands of Corsica and Sardinia because they can. Now, one Carthaginian politician, a man named Hamilcar Barca, comes to the rescue. Inspired by stories from India, he has had wild North African elephants captured and trained for use in fighting. And he brings his elephant force into battle, literally crushing the mercenary rebels. He is now the savior of Carthage, and he will begin to dominate the city. As a military hero, he can do pretty much what he wants. And what he thinks Carthage needs is a new empire to make up for its lost territory in Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica. He leaves for southern Spain, where he founds a new city that he calls New Carthage, called Carthago Nova in Latin, or Cartagena today. Cartagena. He takes his sons with him. He has his sons swear a solemn oath before the gods of Carthage, complete with sacrifices, to never ally themselves with Rome and dedicate their lives to getting even with Rome. Once in Spain, he's very successful. He conquers about half of the Iberian Peninsula, building rapidly a new empire for Carthage. After 10 years of fighting, he dies, and he leaves the leadership of his army to his son, Hannibal Barca. Barca incidentally means lightning in Phoenician. It is the same word as Barak in Hebrew and Baraka in Arabic. Hannibal will continue his father's activities, attempting to conquer Spain. Soon, you can see on this map the growth of the Red Territory, this new Carthaginian Empire in Spain that they built. This is the situation in the Mediterranean around 218 BC. Now, there is a river, the Ebro, that was, according to the original treaty, to mark the boundary between Roman and Carthaginian interests. The Romans would not pursue anything south of the river, Carthaginians nothing north. At the time the treaty was made, neither of them have any interest anywhere close to the river. Now, Hannibal and his father's campaigns have brought Carthaginian control closer and closer to the river. Of course, the people who live there are not particularly eager to be under Carthaginian rule, and some of them in a city called Saguntum send an embassy to the Romans, offering to make a treaty with Rome and become allies. The Roman Senate agrees, and the two cities swear to defend each other if one is attacked. Now, Saguntum is well south of the river Ebro. The Romans, according to the treaty, should not make an alliance with Saguntum. The Romans are perhaps hoping to provoke Hannibal, and the men of Saguntum set about doing exactly that, harassing Hannibal and his followers and basically challenging Hannibal to attack them. Hannibal does attack them in 218 BC, and when he does, he triggers a war with Rome. The Romans will send immediately a Roman army to Spain to help the men of Saguntum, and they expect, when they arrive, to find Hannibal and his army, including the elephants that his father had brought from Africa. When they arrive, though, Hannibal is gone. Hannibal has left with a very large portion of the army marching northwards across the Pyrenees Mountains into what's now France, but at that time is an area of barbarian tribes and wilderness. He marches across southern France into what's now Switzerland, and then swings southwards over the Alps. On his way over the Alps, most of his elephants die, but he arrives in northern Italy, an area where the Romans have only recently conquered the local Celtic tribes. He immediately defeats the Romans. The Romans did not expect to be attacked from the north by the Carthaginians. They're completely unprepared. Many of the Celts join Hannibal's army and move southwards down the Italian peninsula, defeating Roman army after Roman army. Each Roman army that goes out to meet him is basically wiped out. The worst defeat is at a place called Cannae in southern Italy, where Hannibal does what's called a double envelopment. The Roman generals see, oh, there's Hannibal's army, and they surround and attack him on top of a hill, only to their surprise to discover half the Carthaginian army is behind them. They are killed almost to the man. It's estimated 50,000 Roman soldiers killed in a day. After this, the Romans will try to avoid battle and to wear down Hannibal. Spend a lot of time chasing him around Italy, making it hard for him to stay in one place. Yet Hannibal has a bad habit of not allowing himself to be caught. At one point, the Romans chase Hannibal and his army into a canyon that doesn't have very good water supplies. They set up barricades at the front of the canyon, and with the Carthaginian army trapped inside, I think it is just a matter of time before Hannibal and his men get thirsty and hungry and be forced out and surrender. Hannibal sees the situation and comes up with a plan. He has his soldiers tie bundles of sticks to the cattle that they have with them, a movable source of food, tie sticks to the horns and tails of the cows. And then, when darkness falls, take the cows towards the front of the army, and they light the sticks on fire. Now, if you light a fire on a cow's tail, it will run. And many, many cows running together in the same direction in a panic are almost unstoppable. The Romans don't know this is happening. The Romans, thinking that they are about to finally get rid of Hannibal and his army, see torches coming towards them in the night. And they're excited. This is clearly Hannibal's army falling apart. They're not moving in any clear lines. They're just running faster and faster towards them. The war is basically over until hundreds of cattle come crashing through the Roman lines, stomping Roman soldiers to death. And behind the cows, out comes Hannibal's army. And the cows have broken the Roman ranks and allowed Hannibal to get away again. This goes on for 16 years. And Hannibal is not happy. He can't defeat Italy, the Romans. The Romans cannot defeat him. Hannibal does do something that probably his biggest mistake was when he entered Italy. He thought the non-Romans of Italy would rise up and welcome him as a liberator. And he had said to them, I'm here to defeat the Romans. If you're neutral, I'll leave you alone. So many states, cities, had decided to just let Hannibal walk by. But the Romans, meanwhile, have said the Italians need to be on their side, and they would punish those who fight with Hannibal. Hannibal is arguably the fairer one, but it meant that very, very, very few Italians would support Hannibal. The risk is too great. Now, while Hannibal is marching through Italy, the Roman army in Spain has been victorious and driven the Carthaginians out of Spain, led by a man named Scipio, who would gain the title Africanus. Scipio, having conquered Spain, leads a Roman army into Africa. And he decides to use the same strategy Hannibal's using. He'll go into Africa and approach the kingdoms and cities that feel oppressed by Carthage. Unlike the Italians, the North Africans feel they have much more to gain. And the most powerful of them, a man named Massinissa, who's the king of Numidia, makes an alliance with the Romans, providing a massive cavalry army to fight alongside the Romans, and they begin advancing towards Carthage. The Carthaginian government sends a messenger begging Hannibal to come back home. Hannibal comes back home, And on the plain of Zama, Rome and its Numidian allies defeat Hannibal. It's the first battle he has lost, but it is a crushing defeat. The war is basically over. In the peace that now follows, Spain becomes Roman territory. Massinissa gains much of the lands that Carthage had ruled in North Africa. Numidia becomes quite powerful. Hannibal is told that he can no longer be a war leader. He, having during the time that the peace was being negotiated, had gone into business selling olives in Carthage, but he now is forced into exile and becomes a military expert, going around to the kingdoms of Asia that hope to fight against the Romans. Carthage itself is put under very constraining peace. They have to pay an enormous amount of money to Rome. It works out to something like $30 billion in today's money. And they agree to keep their navy at no more than 10 ships. They cannot raise an army without permission from the Romans under any circumstances whatsoever. They are no longer an empire. They are no longer militarily powerful. They're simply another city. Carthage is gone as the great rival to Rome, but Carthage, the city, continues. Now, the Romans, over the next few decades, will be able to expand massively. In the Western Mediterranean, they have no rival whatsoever. They will steadily expand the territory they control, what's now Spain, Portugal, and France. At the same time, they become more and more involved in the conflicts between the various Hellenistic Greek kingdoms and will fight several wars over the next decade against Macedonia, eventually conquering it in Greece, and begin to be pulled further and further east. However, some people in Rome are afraid that the Carthaginians still pose a threat. This man, a senator named Cato the Elder, will be the leader of the anti-Carthaginian faction within the Roman Senate. He famously ends every speech by saying, "Ceterum censeo Carthaginem esse delendum," that is, furthermore, I think that Carthage ought to be destroyed. Sometimes this is just shortened down to Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed. So if the Senate is debating a new road, building an aqueduct, something like that, Cato will speak on it, and he will end his speech by saying, we need a new road, and Carthage must be destroyed. Over time, he gets more and more power, and he has evidence leading to proof of his theory that Carthage is about to come back. Stripped of its empire, the Carthaginians have begun to concentrate on things they do best, which is trade. No longer having to raise heavy taxes to build a military, no longer being constantly at war. Carthage is making more money than they ever have. And in the 50 years after the defeat of Hannibal, Carthage is probably richer than it's ever been before, because of the fact that Carthage's economy is booming. They pay off all their debts to Rome ahead of schedule. They begin to invest in a new wall and some improvements on the city. Now, Cato and other Roman politicians get worried. They think this might be a prelude to a new Carthaginian empire. And they push through in the Senate to make some demands of Carthage. They demand that the Carthaginians demolish their city and rebuild it 10 miles inland. Of course, for the Carthaginians, that is completely ridiculous. They are a sea power, and they refuse. The Romans, who never started war, remember this? Okay? Well, we made reasonable demands. You refused them. You might as well have just said you wanted war. And Rome declares war, what is called the Third Punic War. This time, Rome lands an army outside Carthage, and they will be there for 3 years, grinding down the Carthaginians. When they finally break through the walls of Carthage and enter the city, they discover they are resisted every step of the way. They have to fight house to house because every Carthaginian knows what the Romans want to do. Men, women, old people, children all fight. Children are on roofs throwing rocks at Roman soldiers as they advance. Women are helping to provide weapons to ordinary men. Everyone is making weapons out of whatever they have at hand. And the Romans fight hard. The Romans will end up killing 350,000 people in the city of Carthage. 50,000 people survive. All of them are sold into slavery in Italy. Carthage is destroyed. There are no more Carthaginians. The territory of Carthage is taken over by the Romans. The Romans rename it Africa Proconsularis. They take the name Africa for the new province from the tribe of North Africans who had been living in the territory of Carthage when the Phoenicians first arrived. Africa Proconsularis will have to pay very high taxes in grain and olive oil. These taxes will be collected for 600 years and will fund most of the Roman Empire for that time. They will fund the army, many of the other activities of the Roman state. About 100 years after it was destroyed, Julius Caesar will found a new city named Carthage on the site of the old city, and that city will grow up and once again be a major city in the Western Mediterranean, but it will be a Roman city. With Carthage gone, Rome enters a new age. New conflicts will emerge, and from those conflicts will come ultimately the Roman Empire. Thank you.